John Kipling was the only son of the celebrated British author Rudyard Kipling. When the Great War began in 1914, 17-year-old John was desperate to enlist. Initially rejected due to his extremely poor eyesight, he was eventually granted a commission in the Irish Guards through the influence of his famous father, who pulled strings with old friends in the military establishment. After training, Second Lieutenant Kipling was sent to the Western Front in August of 1915. Just a few weeks later, he would take part in the Battle of Loos, a major British offensive in France. On September 27, 1915, during an assault on a German position known as Chalk Pit Wood, John Kipling was seen advancing with his men into a storm of machine gun fire. He was wounded and fell, disappearing into the smoke and chaos of the battlefield. He was just 18 years old. For years, his parents clung to the hope that he might have been captured or was suffering from amnesia. Rudyard Kipling spent a fortune and used all his considerable influence searching for any trace of his son, but to no avail. John was officially listed as missing, presumed. The immense grief and guilt Rudyard felt over his role in getting his son into the army would haunt him for the rest of his life. He channeled this pain into his work with the Imperial War Graves Commission, the body responsible for creating the cemeteries that now dot the former battlefields. It was Kipling who chose the biblical phrase, "Their name liveth forevermore," for the stones of remembrance found in larger cemeteries, and it was his personal experience of loss that led him to suggest the powerful anonymous epitaph for the headstones of unidentified soldiers. A soldier of the Great War, known unto God. For 77 years, John Kipling had no known grave. Then, in 1992, researchers for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, as it is now known, were able to prove that a grave in St. Mary's Advanced Dressing Station Cemetery, near where he fell, which was marked as an unknown lieutenant of the Irish Guards, was in fact his. The evidence, though circumstantial, was deemed conclusive. The headstone was finally re-engraved with his name, bringing a close to one of the most famous and heartbreaking searches of the First World War. In the vast landscapes of military cemeteries, filled with row upon row of men who died in combat, the grave of Nellie Spindler is a stark and poignant exception. She was a staff nurse in Queen Alexandra's Imperial Military Nursing Service, a corps of professional nurses who served with the British Army. Originally from Wakefield, England, Nellie was a dedicated and experienced nurse who had enlisted in 1915. By the summer of 1917, she was serving at No. 44 Casualty Clearing Station at Brandhoek, a few miles behind the front lines in Belgium. This was during the height of the Third Battle of Ypres, more commonly known as Passchendaele, one of the muddiest and most brutal campaigns of the entire war. Casualty clearing stations were essentially field hospitals, large tented complexes where wounded men were brought directly from the battlefield for emergency surgery and stabilization before being moved to safer hospitals further back. Though they were behind the lines, these stations were still well within the range of heavy German artillery. On the morning of August 21, 1917, the Germans began a fierce bombardment of the area around Brandhoek. A shell fragment struck Nellie Spindler as she was moving between tents, her almost instantly. She was 26 years old. News of her death sent a shockwave through the medical services on the Western Front. While nurses faced constant danger from disease and air raids, to be killed by direct shellfire was a tragic rarity and a grim reminder that no one was truly safe. Nellie Spindler was buried with full military honors the following day in Lysentuuk Military Cemetery, a massive burial ground that grew up around a major complex of casualty clearing stations. Her grave is one of only 2 female war burials in the entire cemetery, which contains over 10,000 graves. Surrounded by the headstones of the soldiers she had cared for, her final resting place is a powerful testament to the courage and sacrifice of the thousands of women who served and died in the Great War. The inscription on her stone, chosen by her family, reads, "A noble type of good heroic womanhood, a fitting tribute to a woman who gave her life while trying to save others." The overwhelming majority of personal inscriptions on the headstones of the First World War express sentiments of pride, love, and patriotic sacrifice. They speak of men who died for king and country, who made the ultimate sacrifice for freedom, or who are now at peace with God. These epitaphs reflect the prevailing attitudes of the time and a desire to find meaning in catastrophic loss. It is incredibly rare, therefore, to find a headstone that carries a message of outright protest against the war itself. The grave of 2nd Lieutenant Arthur Conway Young, located in the vast Étaples military cemetery in France, is one such rarity. Its inscription is a stark, powerful, and unforgettable condemnation of the conflict that claimed his life. At the bottom of his headstone are the words, "Sacrifice to the fallacy that war can end war." Arthur Conway Young was a well-educated and promising young man. A graduate of Cambridge University, he was a teacher at a prestigious school before the war. He enlisted in the Army and served with the 12th Battalion of the London Regiment, known as the Rangers. In 1917, he found himself in the Ypres salient, the brutal, waterlogged battlefield in Belgium where hundreds of thousands of soldiers lost their lives. On February 17, 1917, Arthur was killed in action during the routine daily grind of trench warfare. He was 27 years old. His body was recovered and he was buried at Étaples, which was the site of a major complex of hospitals and reinforcement camps, far from the front line where he fell. The choice of epitaph was almost certainly made by his father, who had to get the wording approved by the Imperial War Graves Commission. The fact that it was allowed is remarkable. It is a direct and unambiguous anti-war statement, questioning the very premise of the war to end all wars. The message rejects the idea that his son's death served a noble or purposeful cause, instead framing it as a pointless sacrifice to a fundamentally flawed idea. It is a declaration of disillusionment and anger, carved into the permanent Portland stone of a military cemetery. The headstone of Arthur Conway Young does more than just mark a place of burial. It serves as a permanent memorial of protest, a voice from the past challenging the justifications for conflict and reminding future generations of the true cost of war. Charles White Whittlesey was a Harvard-educated lawyer from New York City, an unlikely hero who commanded the famed Lost Battalion. In early October 1918, during the Meuse-Argonne offensive, Whittlesey and over 550 men of the 77th Division advanced into the Argonne forest. They pushed too far, and German forces closed in behind them, cutting them off completely. For 5 days, surrounded, with no food, little water, and dwindling ammunition, they endured constant attack, even suffering casualties from friendly artillery fire. Whittlesey refused multiple German demands to surrender. When a message finally got through asking for their location, his famous reply was simply, "We are along the road parallel 276.4. Our own artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it." He and the 194 men who survived were rescued, and he was hailed as a national hero, receiving the Medal of Honor. But the war never left him. He was haunted by the responsibility he felt for the men he lost and suffered from what would today be diagnosed as severe post-traumatic stress disorder. On the night of November 26, 1921, while on a passenger ship bound for Havana, Major Charles Whittlesey wrote several letters, left them in his cabin, and then vanished. It is believed he jumped overboard, taking his own life. His body was never recovered. Because his final resting place is the Atlantic Ocean, he has no grave. A cenotaph, a memorial monument, stands in his honor in the Pittsfield Cemetery in his hometown of Pittsfield, Massachusetts. This stone marker serves as the only terrestrial point of remembrance for him. The absence of a grave is perhaps the most tragic and fitting monument to Whittlesey's story. A hero celebrated by a nation but privately consumed by the war. His end as lonely and lost as his command in the Argonne forest. Francis Pegamagabao, an Ojibwe man from the Wasauksing First Nation in Ontario, was one of the most effective and decorated soldiers in Canadian history. As a scout and sniper, he was credited with killing 378 Germans and capturing 300 more. He fought through some of the war's most horrific battles, including Second Ypres, the Somme, and Passchendaele, earning the military medal twice and surviving being wounded and gassed. His skills as a marksman and scout were legendary, rooted in the traditions of his people. Yet when he returned to Canada, he faced continued discrimination and the denial of basic rights afforded to other veterans. He didn't let this deter him. He became a fierce advocate for indigenous rights, serving as chief of his band and fighting against the oppressive policies of the Canadian government. He passed away on his home reserve on August 5, 1952. He is buried in the Wasauksing First Nation Cemetery near Parry Sound, Ontario, on the land of his ancestors. His grave is marked by a dignified granite headstone, which includes his name, rank of sergeant, and military decorations. An image of a caribou representing his clan is etched into the stone. The location of his grave is profoundly significant. After fighting for Canada on foreign soil, he returned to fight a different kind of battle for his own people at home. Resting eternally on his ancestral land, his grave is a powerful symbol of his dual identity. It commemorates not only one of the Great War's most lethal soldiers, but also a dedicated leader who fought for the rights and recognition of his First Nation. His final resting place is a tribute to both the warrior and the chief, a hero to Canada, and most importantly, to his people. Gunnery Sergeant Dan Daly was a United States Marine of legendary status before the First World War even began. He had already earned the Medal of Honor twice for separate actions in the Boxer Rebellion in 1900 and in Haiti in 1915. In 1918, he found himself in the thick of the fighting in France. At the Battle of Belleau Wood, with his unit pinned down and taking heavy casualties, the then 44-year-old Daly famously rallied his men by climbing out of a trench and yelling, "Come on, you sons of bitches, do you want to live forever?" His bravery was relentless. He single-handedly attacked machine gun nests and captured numerous prisoners. Though he was recommended for a third Medal of Honor, he was instead awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. After the war, he served until his retirement in 1929, after which he lived a quiet life as a bank guard in New York. He died on April 27, 1937. Dan Daly is buried in Cypress Hills National Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York. His grave is marked by a standard, unassuming government headstone, the same type given to countless other service members. However, a small detail on the stone sets it apart and speaks to his immense valor. Below his name and rank, it is inscribed with Medal of Honor II. This simple marking on a plain stone is a testament to his extraordinary courage. Being one of only 19 men in history to have received the nation's highest award twice. His resting place in one of the country's oldest national cemeteries is a humble end for a man whose actions and words have become immortalized in the lore of the United States Marine Corps. He lies not under a grand monument, but as an equal among his fellow veterans, his legacy secured not by an ornate tomb, but by his incredible deeds. Private Joseph Oklahombi, a member of the Choctaw Nation from Oklahoma, was one of the original Choctaw code talkers, using his native language to transmit secure messages that the Germans could not decipher. But his most legendary action occurred on October 8, 1918, the same day as Alvin York's famous feat. During the Meuse-Argonne offensive, Oklahombi and 23 other soldiers rushed a German position. After the other Americans fell or took cover, Oklahombi continued the advance alone. For 4 days, he held a captured position, crossing back and forth across no man's land under heavy fire, numerous enemy soldiers and capturing a staggering 171 prisoners. He was awarded the French Croix de Guerre for his bravery. Despite being one of the most decorated soldiers of the war, he returned home to a quiet life in Oklahoma, his story largely unknown outside of his community. His life ended tragically on April 13, 1960, when he was struck by a truck. He's buried in the Yashau Cemetery, a small Choctaw community cemetery near his home in Wright City, Oklahoma. His grave is marked by a private headstone, not a military one, which was erected by his family. It notes his service with Company D of the 141st Infantry. His final resting place is deeply significant. He is not in a national cemetery, but among his own people, in the soil of the Choctaw Nation he called home. For decades, his incredible wartime feats were a point of local pride rather than national recognition. His humble grave, often decorated with flowers and small flags by community members, symbolizes a hero who was defined not just by his actions in France, but by his lifelong connection to his culture, his language, and his land. He was a Choctaw warrior first, and a celebrated American soldier second. Herman Davis, a quiet woodsman from rural Arkansas, possessed an almost superhuman skill with a rifle. When he enlisted in the Army, his remarkable marksmanship quickly set him apart. As a scout and sniper in the 113th Infantry, he was tasked with some of the most dangerous missions, often crawling deep into enemy territory. In one famous instance near Verdun, he took his rifle and crawled to within shooting distance of a well-placed German machine gun that had his company pinned down. In the pouring rain, he single-handedly killed the four-man crew, allowing his unit to advance. General Pershing later named Davis one of the four greatest heroes of the war, alongside Alvin York and Samuel Woodville. He survived the fighting, but not its after-effects. Like so many soldiers, he had been exposed to poison gas, which severely damaged his lungs. He contracted tuberculosis after returning home and succumbed to the illness on January 5, 1923. He was only 34 years old. Herman Davis is buried in the Manila Cemetery in his hometown of Manila, Arkansas. His grave is not marked by a simple headstone, but is the focal point of the Herman Davis State Park, a park created specifically to honor him. A tall, imposing granite monument rises over his grave, topped by a life-sized statue of Davis in his doughboy uniform, holding his trusty rifle. The monument's base is inscribed with details of his heroic actions and the high praise he received from General Pershing and other military leaders. This grand memorial is a testament to the immense pride his community and the state of Arkansas felt for their local hero. Unlike the modest graves of many other soldiers, Davis's final resting place is a public declaration of his valor, ensuring that the legacy of this quiet sharpshooter from the Arkansas backwoods will not be forgotten. Private John Parr holds a sad and significant distinction in the history of the First World War. He is believed to be the very first soldier of the British Empire to be killed in action. A former golf caddy, he had joined the Army to escape a mundane job, and as a reconnaissance cyclist with the 4th Battalion, Middlesex Regiment, he was part of the British Expeditionary Force sent to the continent. On August 21, 1914, just 17 days after Britain declared war on Germany, Parr and another cyclist were sent forward to the village of Aubourg, near Mons in Belgium, to locate the position of the advancing German army. What happened next is uncertain, but it is thought that Parr encountered a German cavalry patrol and was killed in the ensuing skirmish. He was just 17 years old. His death occurred 2 days before the Battle of Mons officially began, a solitary loss that was the first drop in an ocean of bloodshed to come. Parr is buried in the Saint Symphorien Military Cemetery, just southeast of Mons. This cemetery is unique. It was created by the Germans on land donated by a Belgian, with the specific provision that it would be a resting place for soldiers from both sides of the conflict. Parr's grave is marked by the simple, elegant headstone of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. By a remarkable twist of fate, his grave lies just a few yards from that of Private George Edwin Ellison, the last British soldier killed in action on November 11, 1918. The first and the last British combat casualties of the Great War, resting forever in the same small cemetery. Parr's simple headstone, notable for its early date of death, is a poignant starting point for the millions of graves that would follow over the next 4 years. Henry John Harry Patch was a British plumber who was conscripted into the Army in 1916. As a Lewis gunner in the Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry, he fought in the horrific Battle of Passchendaele in 1917. During the battle, he was severely wounded by a shell explosion that killed 3 of his closest friends. The experience marked him for life. For decades, he never spoke of the war. It was only in his later years, as he became one of the last surviving veterans, that he began to share his story, becoming a powerful voice for peace and reconciliation. He was the last surviving combat soldier, or Tommy, to have served in the trenches. His death on July 25, 2009, at the age of 111, was a moment of national mourning in Britain, marking the final, silent passing of a generation that had endured the unimaginable. Harry Patch's final wishes reflected the profound conclusions he had drawn from his experiences. He is buried not in a military cemetery, but in the graveyard of St. Michael's Church in his hometown of Combe Down, Somerset. He insisted on a simple burial, and his headstone is a small, unadorned dark slate marker. The inscription is plain, bearing only his name and dates: Harry Patch, 1898 to 2009. Below this, he chose a simple but powerful epitaph that summarized his life's final message: peace and goodwill to all men. He considered war to be nothing more than organized murder, and refused a grave that glorified conflict in any way. This humble grave, with its plea for peace, serves as the final eloquent statement from the last Tommy, a man who survived the hell of the trenches and spent the rest of his long life reminding the world of its ultimate futility. Lazar Ponticelli lived a truly remarkable life. An Italian immigrant who came to France as a child, he lied about his age to join the French Foreign Legion in 1914. He fought at the front until Italy entered the war in 1915, at which point he was compelled to join the Italian army. He was wounded and continued to fight in the Alps against the Austro-Hungarians. After the war, he returned to France, became a citizen, and founded a successful engineering company with his brothers. As he aged, he became the last surviving officially recognized French veteran of the war, a living symbol of the millions of ordinary soldiers, or poilus, who had defended France. His death on March 12, 2008, at the age of 110, was a major national event, signifying the end of an era for the entire country. As the last poilu, the French government offered him the nation's highest honor, a state funeral and burial in the Pantheon, alongside France's most revered figures like Victor Hugo and Marie Curie. Ponticelli firmly refused. He stated that it would be an insult to the countless ordinary soldiers who had died without recognition. "I am no better than the others," he said. He eventually agreed to a national memorial service at Les Invalides on the condition that he would be buried in his family's tomb. True to his word, Lazar Ponticelli was laid to rest in the Ponticelli family vault in the Parisian suburb of Ivry-sur-Seine. His name is simply one among others on a modest family grave. This final act of profound humility is his most enduring legacy. By choosing his family over national glory, his simple grave became a powerful monument not to himself, but to the memory of every anonymous soldier of the Great War. Corporal Thomas A. Pope of the 130th Infantry, 33rd Division, earned his place in history on a single day, July 4th, 1918. During an attack on the French village of Hamel, his company was met with withering machine gun fire that halted their advance. All the other members of Pope's squad were or wounded. Alone, Pope charged the enemy gun. He was shot in the leg but continued his assault, several of the gunners with his rifle and using the butt end to disable the rest. He then stood his ground, holding the position single-handedly against enemy counterattacks until his company could finally advance and relieve him. His incredible display of courage on that Independence Day earned him the Medal of Honor. He survived the war and returned to the United States, living a long and relatively quiet life, working for many years as an auditor. He passed away on June 14, 1989, at the age of 94. Thomas Pope's final resting place is Arlington National Cemetery, the nation's most hallowed ground. He is buried in Section 59, his grave marked by the iconic white marble headstone that stands in uniform rows throughout the cemetery. The stone is simple, bearing his name, rank, the state of Illinois from which he served, and his dates of birth and death. Most importantly, it is inscribed with the words, Medal of Honor. The uniformity of Arlington is part of its power. Generals and privates lie side by side, their headstones identical. Pope's grave is a quiet but permanent testament to his extraordinary valor. It stands among thousands of others, a simple marker of stone that represents the highest ideals of courage and sacrifice, ensuring that his heroic actions on that July day in 1918 are forever woven into the fabric of American military history. Aníbal Augusto Milhais was a poor farmer from northern Portugal who became his country's most decorated soldier of the First World War. During the Battle of the Lys in Flanders in 1918, the German spring offensive overwhelmed the Portuguese lines. As his unit retreated, Milhais stayed behind alone, armed only with his Lewis machine gun. He laid down such intense and accurate fire from different positions that he convinced the Germans they were facing an entire unit, not a single man. He covered the retreat of his comrades and even rescued a Scottish major from the battlefield. When he finally ran out of ammunition and rejoined his unit, his commander greeted him with the words, "You are Milhias, but you are worth millions." From then on, he was known as Soldado Milhões, the soldier millions. He survived the war and returned to his home village, where he lived a simple, humble life. He passed away on June 3, 1970. His burial place reflects the immense esteem in which he was held. He was laid to rest in the cemetery of his native village, Valongo, which was officially renamed Valongo de Milhões in his honor. His grave is not a simple marker, but a local shrine, often adorned with Portuguese flags and flowers left by visitors. A statue commemorating his deeds was also erected in the village. His burial in the town that carries his name is a unique and powerful tribute. While not a global figure within Portugal, Soldado Milhões is a national legend, embodying the courage of the ordinary soldier. His grave serves as the focal point of this legacy, a permanent monument in the heart of his community, ensuring that the farmer who was worth 1,000,000 men is remembered forever in the soil he called home. Albert Roche was arguably one of the most tenacious and effective soldiers of the entire war, yet his story remains widely unknown. Rejected by the army for being too short, he persisted and was finally allowed to enlist. His record of accomplishments is almost unbelievable. He's credited with capturing 1,180 prisoners, was wounded 9 times, and once crawled for hours through trenches to single-handedly silence a German machine gun blockhouse with grenades. Marshal Ferdinand Foch, the supreme Allied commander, would later call him the first soldier of France. Despite his incredible record and numerous decorations, he struggled after the war, finding only simple work and living in relative obscurity. His life came to a sudden and tragic end on April 14, 1939, when he was struck and killed by a vehicle, just months before the world would once again be plunged into war. He is buried in the small cemetery of his native village, Réauville, in southeastern France. His grave is remarkably simple for a man of his stature, marked by a modest stone cross. It lies in a quiet, rural graveyard, a world away from the noise and fury of the battlefields where he performed his legendary exploits. The humility of his final resting place reflects the obscurity into which this great hero fell after the war. There is no grand monument, no national shrine, just the grave of a local man who had once been the pride of the entire French army. Albert Roche's grave is a poignant reminder that immense bravery does not always guarantee lasting fame, and that the final resting places of even the most extraordinary heroes can be found in the quiet, forgotten corners of the countryside they fought to defend. Sub-Lieutenant Vladimir Karpovich Kutlinsky of the Russian Imperial Army was the leader of one of the most ghastly and terrifying counterattacks in military history, the Attack of the Dead Men. On August 6, 1915, at Osowiec Fortress in what is now Poland, the German army unleashed a massive wave of chlorine and bromine gas against the Russian defenders. The gas turned the grass black and the leaves on the trees yellow. It was assumed that all the defenders had been killed. As the Germans advanced on the seemingly empty fortress, they were met with an unbelievable sight. Led by the dying Kotlinski, about 100 surviving Russian soldiers, their faces scarred by chemical burns, their uniforms bloodied, and coughing up pieces of their own lungs, rose from the toxic fog and charged. The horrifying appearance of these dead men caused such panic among the German ranks that they broke and fled, some even becoming entangled and dying in their own barbed wire. The charge was successful, but it was a final convulsive act of defiance. Vladimir Kotlinsky, who had led the charge despite his fatal poisoning, died from the effects of the gas later that same evening. He was posthumously awarded the Order of St. George. He was initially buried with honors in his native city of Pskov. However, his story and his grave became victims of the history that followed. The Russian Revolution of 1917 and the subsequent establishment of the Soviet Union led to the suppression of many stories of Tsarist heroes. Cemeteries were destroyed, repurposed, or fell into neglect. It is believed that Vladimir Kotlinski's grave was lost during this period. Today, there is no known burial site or marker for him. He is a hero without a grave, his memory preserved not by a tombstone, but by the sheer, horrifying power of his final defiant charge. Hauptmann Oswald Boelcke was the father of the German fighter air force and a tactical genius. With 40 aerial victories, he was one of Germany's first great aces, but his most important contribution was not his personal score. He was the first to analyze and systematize the principles of aerial combat, codifying them into the Dicta Boelcke, a set of rules that included maxims like always attack from the sun and attack in groups of 4 or 6. These rules became the foundation of fighter tactics for generations and are still relevant today. He was also a gifted leader who mentored a new generation of pilots, including the man who would become his most famous student, Manfred von Richthofen. His death on October 28, 1916, was a tragic accident. During a dogfight, his aircraft collided with that of his friend, Erwin Böhme. Boelcke's plane lost a wing and he was killed in the resulting crash. He was just 25 years old. The German Empire mourned him as a national hero. He was given a state funeral and buried in the Cemetery of Honor in his hometown of Dessau. His original grave was marked by a large, ornate monument featuring an eagle. However, the grave and the cemetery itself suffered the turbulent fate of Germany in the 20th century. The monument was damaged during heavy Allied bombing in World War II, and the site was neglected during the subsequent decades of East German communist rule. Today, the grave is far more modest. A simple modern stone marker bears his name, rank, and dates. The story of Boelcke's grave, from grand imperial monument to a simple modern stone, mirrors the history of his nation. His true memorial, however, is not made of stone but is found in the tactical doctrines studied by air forces across the globe. Ernst Junger was not a general or a celebrated ace, but his legacy from the First World War is one of the most profound. As a German stormtrooper officer, he fought on the Western Front for the entire duration of the war, participating in some of its most brutal battles on the Somme and at Passchendaele. He was wounded an astonishing 14 times and was awarded the Pour le Mérite, Imperial Germany's highest military honor. More importantly, after the war, he published his diary under the title In Stahlgewittern, or Storm of Steel. It was an unflinchingly detailed, detached, and brutally honest account of the realities of industrial warfare. The book became a literary classic, famous for its portrayal of combat not as a heroic ideal, but as a powerful, elemental, and terrifying force. Junger went on to live an exceptionally long and complex life, serving again in Paris during World War II and becoming a major, though controversial figure in German literature and philosophy. He died on February 17, 1998, at the age of 102. He's buried in the small cemetery of Wilflingen, the German village where he had lived for nearly 50 years. His final resting place is one of profound simplicity. There is no grand monument or military marker. Instead, his grave is marked by a plain, hand-hewn wooden cross, the kind that might be found in any rural churchyard. His name and dates are simply carved into the wood. He rests next to his wife, Lieselotte, and his son, Ernstel, who was killed serving in the German army in Italy in 1944. The striking humility of the grave seems a deliberate choice. After a lifetime of documenting and surviving the storms of a violent century, a life filled with complexity and controversy, his final resting place is one of absolute peace. The simple wooden cross speaks not of steel, but of a quiet, traditional end to an extraordinarily long journey. Every war has a beginning, a first casualty that marks the transition from political tension to violent reality. For the British Army in the First World War, that individual was Private John Parr. A young man from Finchley in North London, he had lied about his age to join the Middlesex Regiment in 1912, seeking a life of adventure. By the summer of 1914, he was serving as a reconnaissance cyclist, a role that required him to ride ahead of the main army units to gather information on the enemy's position and movements. In August 1914, after Britain declared war on Germany, Parr's unit was sent to France as part of the British Expeditionary Force. The army was moving forward into Belgium to meet the advancing Germans, unsure of their precise location. On August 21, 1914, just 2 days after he had landed in France and 17 days after Britain entered the war, Private Parr and another cyclist were sent from the village of Aubourg, near the city of Mons, with orders to locate the enemy. It is believed they rode northeast and encountered a cavalry patrol from the German First Army. What happened next is not known for certain, but it is presumed that an exchange of fire took place, and John Parr was killed. He was 17 years old. His comrade managed to escape and report back, but Parr's body was not immediately recovered, and for a long time, he was simply listed as missing. His family was not officially notified of his death until well into 1915. After the war, his body was identified and he was buried in the Saint-Symphorien Military Cemetery, just outside Mons. In a remarkable and poignant twist of fate, the same cemetery also contains the grave of Private George Ellison, the last British soldier to be killed in action on the Western Front, who died on November 11, 1918, 90 minutes before the armistice took effect. The cemetery, uniquely, was established by the German army to bury both British and German dead with equal respect. The graves of John Parr, the first, and George Ellison, the last, lie just a few yards apart. Their presence in the same small cemetery creates a powerful and symbolic bookend to the 4 years of industrial slaughter that cost the British Empire nearly 1 million lives. Parr's grave marks the very beginning of that immense sacrifice.